Hello to all these people who have come here today, and we start from my right side. And here we go.
Good morning.
Hi, Mom.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And good morning.
Glad we could get together.
Okay. And so we were in the middle of discussing last week the concept of performing mitzvahs, doing what God asks to do. And we discussed the differences between the mitzvahs before we get into the general concept of mitzvahs. There are some commandments that are obviously basic civil law that every single country that wants to be a country must have in their charter, in their laws. And those are, for example, don't kill and don't steal and be honest, don't lie, don't cheat. These are ideas that if the Torah wouldn't have said them, they would still be part of law as they are in every country that not necessarily follows the Torah. They have to be. And the countries that don't quite follow them are countries that are in complete chaos and mess and terrorism or dictatorship and so on, where people don't have freedom to do anything. The second type of commandment are called testimonials. These are commandments that God says to do, and He gives a valid reason for them, and once the reason is given, they say, oh, well, that makes sense. For example, to eat matzah on Passover, or to dwell in a sukkah, or Shabbos. God created the world in 6 days. He rested on the seventh. He wants you to appreciate that. And the bris milah, which is in this week's Torah portion, the circumcision, these are mitzvahs that once they are given, and the reasons also are given, then they make sense. They are right. You say, okay, I wouldn't have thought of it maybe before, putting on tefillin, having a mezuzah, but now that you mention it and you give the reason, it makes sense. I might not want to do them, but that's my choice. But the mitzvah itself, the commandment, makes sense. Then the third category are called statutes. These are commandments that have no reason given for them. No logic is given for these commandments. For example, all the laws of purity and impurity. So if this happens, then you become impure. If you touch a dead body, you become unclean. And how do you become clean? Oh, by sprinkling some water mixed with ash from a dead cow. That makes you clean. Huh? Well, how did that happen? Or don't wear garments that have both linen and wool together in the same garment. But why not? Because I said so. Or keep kosher. He doesn't give the reasons for keeping kosher. He says if you keep kosher, you become holy like I am holy. So let's see. If I eat the lamb, I can become holy. But if I eat a crab, I can't become holy. I become unholy. What do you mean by that? Why? So the Torah does not provide the reasons for these type of laws. We can talk reasons, and there are reasons that are suggested, and they would make sense as well. But the Torah itself, in the written Torah, there is no reason that is provided for it. Whoa! Now that is
Welcome back.
a great development. With no sling, two shoulders moving.
All right.
A grand entrance.
Excellent.
So those are the three categories of commandments that are found in the Torah. Ones that are basic civil laws that would make sense anywhere, even without the Torah. Others that make sense once the Torah has presented them, and others that have no logical reason that are provided in the Torah. When the Torah commands them, He doesn't say this is why. He just says this is what I want you to do. So those are the three categories of commandments that are found in the Torah. I wanted to mention also June. Thank you so much for buying that little machine, that contraption that cuts bagels. Makes our fingers and our bagels much more delicious.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
You just can't use it on Saturday.
Oh, you can. It's a knife.
It's a nice.
There's no electricity in it.
Nice.
We don't necessarily use bagels on Shabbos, but
I do, but that's
No, you're not allowed. We just, that's, the challah is so much better there. We live in a house that has a good bakery. Or should I say a good baker?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're now on page 41,
Oh, 41.
which should be the first page in the copies that you have in front of you. Okay. We'll start at the beginning of the page, although we actually started the first paragraph last week, at the end of last week's class. We'll start again. We can now, we can understand this last point based on the following known idea. This idea is discussed elsewhere in Hasidic teachings, and the Rebbe is going to develop this idea. Even the testimonial and judicial mitzvot. Testimonial are those mitzvot which give basically testimony. Like Shabbos is a testimony that God created the world in 6 days, and the seventh day he rested. And the bris, and the circumcision, is a testimony that God has a permanent connection or covenant with his people, and therefore you have it's on the body, and so on. So those are testimonial commandments, and the judicial commandments, which are basic civil laws. Even those commandments, which make logical sense to perform them, must be fulfilled primarily because they are the divine will, just like the statute type of mitzvot. Now, in footnote number 63, he basically encapsulated what he's about to develop over here, which is a pretty deep point. As the discourse will now explain, there are two reasons why all mitzvot should be fulfilled as if they are statutes, i.e. because God commanded us to do so. There are two reasons why this should be the case with mitzvahs. Number one, so that one may realize the lofty divine service of a servant who does exactly what he is told to do and does not have his own agenda. And we developed this we spoke about this at length last week. When a person who is a worker for you, you want that person, when you tell that worker, I want you to come into my house and do the laundry and wash up the dishes and clean and mop the floor. And then that person comes in and doesn't do the dishes, but mops the floor, does the laundry, and then washes the walls. And you come in and you say, well, what did you do with the floor? And you say, oh, I didn't mop the floor, but I washed the walls. You say, thank you, but I asked you to do the floor. Like, well, what are you telling me about my house? This is my house. I'm paying you for this. You do what I ask you to do. That's what a worker does, or a servant in that case. So one thing is that a servant does what he is told to do. That's what a servant does. So we are like servants to God, and therefore we should follow those commandments, even the ones that make sense, not just because they make sense, and therefore I'm going to do them, but because that's what the Master asked us to do. Finished. So that should be the primary idea. That's point number one. And point number two, reason number two, because all mitzvot are expressions of God's will. Everything, even don't steal, it's not because don't steal makes sense, but because God said don't steal. He wants you not to steal. They're His will, even though they're like, why do you have to tell us not to eat a spider? The Torah says don't eat creepy crawlies. The Torah says it's 4 or 5 times. You can think to yourself, not to eat a fly? Like, huh? Who wants to do that? Like, it's gross. But it says more times not to eat a fly than not to eat pig. So it shows that how the mitzvahs that's God's will. So it's not just because it is this. He would have to just mention it one time. Don't eat anything that flies around or walks on little 8 legs or something. That would be enough. But he goes on and on about this stuff because that's his will. So he wants us to do the commandments, everything, all of them. In other words, the first method here is you're a servant. You're told what to do. You do what you're told to do. That's what a servant does. That's what a worker does. That's what an employee. That's what you do. You're asked to do something, you do it. But a deeper level is because even the things that you know logical to be correct, that even without the Torah, you're still doing them because God wants me to do them. I like to fulfill His will. His desire lies equally at the core of every mitzvah. You can think, all right, the big ones I'm going to do. All right, I'm fasting on Yom Kippur. I'm going to eat matzah on Passover. I'm going to light the menorah. The little ones, about the small things. That's not necessarily. I'm not up there yet. Now, why would you think the big ones are important? Why do people think the big ones are important? Because they're big. What makes them big? You can say, well, we've seen so many other people do it, so it must be big. Or you can say, look at the punishment that comes with it. That's pretty severe, so that means that must be a big one. Putting a mezuzah on the door, well, it's not a big, it's just, it's one of the commandments. The mezuzah's on it. If I have it. No, I'm not. I'm not going to bother with those, the smaller ones. But the truth is, the same God that says, fast on Yom Kippur, or eat matzah, don't have any chametz in your house, or light the menorah, the same God says, have mezuzah and keep kosher and keep Shabbat. It's fulfilling the will of the same God. And when God has that will to fulfill, then we it's His desire that we do that, so then it's important that these are done no matter what. There is a Torah portion towards the end of the Torah, in the third portion of the book of Deuteronomy, the book of Devarim, the final book of the Torah, which is called Akev. That's the name of the Torah portion. It's the second word of the portion. And the words of the Torah there are, V'haya Akev Tishma'un. And it will be when Tishma'un, you will hearken to God's commandments, and God will give you this and that and the other, and all the rewards that are promised over there. But the word when, which is the name of the portion, Akev, that word in Hebrew also means the heel. The word for heel on a person's leg, or both legs, the word for heel in Hebrew is Akev.